The magnolia trees were in full bloom that humid April evening. Their sweet fragrance drifted through the wrought iron gates of the Harper mansion. But inside those gates, something bitter was brewing. Have you ever walked into a room where you knew you weren't wanted, where every glance felt like judgment, every whisper like a dagger to your heart? Welcome back. Tell me from which city you are watching me and what time it is there. Now, listen to this story. Emma Harper stood at the edge of the circular driveway, clutching her son Lucas's small hand. The 6-year-old looked up at the towering columns of his grandfather's mansion with wide eyes. Emma felt her stomach twist into knots. She shouldn't be here. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and walk away. But Lucas deserved better than her fears. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago. Cream-colored paper with elegant gold lettering. The Harper Family Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Emma had read it 5 times before believing it was real. After 2 years of silence from her ex-husband's family, why now? She smoothed down her black dress. It was the nicest thing she owned, bought from a consignment shop downtown for $40. She'd saved for 3 months. The massive oak doors opened. A woman in pearls and a knowing smile appeared. "Emma, darling, so glad you could make it." Janet Reeves, Emma's ex-sister-in-law, married to David's older brother, Richard. Janet's smile never reached her eyes. It never had. "Thank you for inviting us," Emma replied quietly. Janet's gaze swept over Emma's dress, her shoes, her simple jewelry. Emma felt herself shrinking under that scrutiny. Of course, family is family, isn't it? The words dripped with false sweetness. Inside, the mansion buzzed with conversation and crystal clinking. Savannah's elite mingled beneath glittering chandeliers. Women in designer gowns laughed politely. Men in tailored suits discussed business and politics. Emma had forgotten how suffocating this world could be. She guided Lucas toward the refreshment table. Maybe they could grab some food and find a quiet corner. Stay invisible until it was acceptable to leave. That's when she overheard the conversation that would change everything. "I simply cannot believe the audacity," Janet was saying to a small group of women near the grand staircase. Her voice carried despite her attempt at whispering. Emma froze. Lucas tugged at her hand, but she couldn't move. "Single mothers these days expect everyone else to solve their problems," Janet continued. "Take Emma, for instance, David's ex-wife. She shows up tonight probably hoping for some kind of handout." Emma's cheeks burned. Her heart hammered against her ribs. One of the women, Mrs. Patterson from the country club, nodded sympathetically. "It must be so difficult for your family, having to deal with that kind of situation." "Desperate, really?" Janet sighed dramatically. "Working multiple jobs, dragging that poor child from one apartment to another. I heard she's been a waitress, a housekeeper, even cleaned offices at night. Can you imagine?" The group made appropriate sounds of dismay. Emma wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor and never be seen again. "Of course we've tried to help," Janet continued. "But there's only so much you can do for someone who lacks, well, breeding, class, the fundamental understanding of how proper families function." Lucas looked up at Emma with concern. "Mama, why are you crying?" She wasn't crying. Not yet. But her vision had blurred, and her throat felt raw. What Emma didn't know was that someone else was listening, too. Mr. Harold Carlyle stood partially hidden behind one of the mansion's massive columns. The family lawyer had arrived early to discuss foundation business with the Harper patriarch. Instead, he found himself witnessing something that made his blood run cold. Carlyle had known the Harper family for 37 years. He'd handled their legal affairs through marriages, births, business deals, and deaths. He prided himself on discretion and loyalty. But this was unconscionable. He watched Emma's face crumble, watched her try to maintain composure for her son's sake, watched her shoulders square with familiar dignity as she whispered something comforting to the boy. Carlyle had seen that same quiet strength before. In Emma's father, Thomas Mitchell. Thomas had been gone for 8 years now. Heart attack at 52. But Carlyle remembered him vividly. A carpenter by trade, Thomas had worked on renovations at the Harper estate for nearly a decade. More than that, he'd been a friend to old William Harper when friendship meant something real. The two men had spent countless evenings on the mansion's back porch, sharing whiskey and stories, talking about their children, their dreams, their fears. William Harper had never forgotten Thomas's kindness during his wife's final illness. When everyone else offered empty condolences, Thomas had simply shown up, day after day, to fix things around the house, to listen, to be present. That's why William had made the amendment to his will, an amendment that Janet clearly knew nothing about. Carlyle straightened his tie and made a decision that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives. The next morning, Emma sat in her tiny kitchen, staring at her coffee cup. She'd barely slept. Lucas was at school, and the house felt eerily quiet. Janet's words played on repeat in her mind. Lax breeding, class. Maybe she was right. Emma had grown up in a modest neighborhood on the other side of town. Her father had worked with his hands. Her mother had taken in laundry to make ends meet. After the divorce, Emma had struggled to build a life from nothing. She was a waitress, a housekeeper, someone who cleaned offices in the dark hours before dawn. Was that something to be ashamed of? The doorbell rang. Emma almost didn't answer. She wasn't expecting anyone, and unexpected visitors usually meant bad news. Bills, problems, complications she couldn't afford. But the bell rang again, and then a third time. She opened the door to find an elderly gentleman in a crisp navy suit. Silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression of profound sadness. Ms. Harper? My name is Harold Carlyle. I'm the attorney for the Harper family estate. I wonder if we might speak privately. Emma's hands went cold. Is Lucas okay? Did something happen at school? No, nothing like that. Your son is fine. This concerns you directly. May I come in? Emma's living room was small but spotless. Second-hand furniture arranged carefully to create warmth despite their obvious age. Photos of Lucas covered one wall. His artwork from school decorated the refrigerator visible from the doorway. Carlyle noticed everything: the worn carpet cleaned to perfection, the single books on the coffee table, clearly read multiple times, the mended throw pillow that showed Emma's efforts to make this modest space a home. Ms. Harper, I was at the gala last night, he began carefully. Emma's face flushed. Mr. Carlyle, I'm sorry if I said or did anything inappropriate. I know I probably shouldn't have been there. Stop. His voice was firm but gentle. You have every right to be there. More right than most people in that room. Emma frowned. I don't understand. Carlyle leaned forward in his chair. What I'm about to tell you may come as a shock, but I believe it's information you deserve to have. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. Your father, Thomas Mitchell, he was more than just a contractor to the Harper family. He was a dear friend to William Harper, the family patriarch. When William died 5 years ago, he left specific provisions in his will regarding you and your son. Emma's world tilted. Provisions? William established a trust fund for Lucas's education and future. Additionally, he left a significant inheritance for you, in recognition of your father's friendship and service to the family. The room felt smaller suddenly. Emma couldn't catch her breath. That can't be right. It is right. The trust is worth approximately $200,000. Your inheritance is substantial enough to ensure financial security for both you and Lucas. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Why wasn't I told before now? Carlyle's expression grew troubled. That's where the situation becomes complicated. The family has been aware of these provisions since William's death. However, certain members have chosen not to inform you. They've been hoping the statute of limitations would somehow nullify the will. Certain members, meaning Janet. I cannot make specific accusations, but I will say that after what I witnessed last night, I felt morally obligated to ensure you knew your rights. Emma turned back to face him. What exactly did you witness? I heard Mrs. Reeves disparaging your character and circumstances to other guests. making it clear she viewed you as an opportunist seeking handouts from the family. The humiliation from the previous evening crashed over Emma again, but now it mixed with something else. Anger. She knew, didn't she? About the will. I believe so. Mrs. Reeves has been present at several family meetings where the estate was discussed. She's been actively discouraging any contact with you or Lucas. Emma sank back into her chair. Why would she do that? Carlyle hesitated. He'd seen enough family drama to understand the dynamics at play. Mrs. Reeves has 2 children of her own. She views any inheritance going to you as money taken from them. Further, she's been experiencing some financial difficulties that the family is not fully aware of. What kind of difficulties? That's not my place to discuss. But I will say that her interest in limiting your access to the Harper estate goes beyond mere personal dislike. Emma's mind raced. Lucas's future. Her future. The years of struggling, working multiple jobs, feeling like a failure. What happens now? That's entirely up to you. You can claim your inheritance at any time. The legal process is straightforward. However, I should warn you that pursuing this may create significant conflict within the family. Emma looked at the photos of Lucas on her wall. His bright smile in his school pictures. The artwork he created with such care and pride. Mr. Carlyle, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you helping me? You work for the Harper family. Wouldn't it be easier to just let this go? The elderly lawyer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. I've practiced law for 42 years, Miss Harper. I've seen families torn apart by greed. I've watched good people destroyed by those with more power and fewer scruples. Your father was one of the finest men I ever knew. The fact that his daughter has been treated with such casual cruelty, it violates everything I believe about justice and decency. He stood, leaving the folder on her coffee table. Take time to think about it. When you're ready to proceed, call me. After he left, Emma sat in silence for over an hour. She thought about her father, gone too soon. About the nights he'd come home exhausted from physical labor but still made time to help her with homework. About his hands, scarred and weathered, but always gentle when they smoothed her hair or wiped her tears. She thought about Lucas, who never complained when dinner was peanut butter sandwiches again. Who wore hand-me-down clothes without question. Who told his friends his mama was the strongest person he knew. She thought about Janet's words. Lax breeding, class. Maybe Emma didn't have breeding in Janet's sense. But she had something else. Something her father had taught her. Dignity. Integrity. The knowledge that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or their address. That evening, when Lucas came home from school, Emma made his favorite dinner. Mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs. They ate at their small kitchen table while he told her about his day. Mama, Tyler's dad came to talk to our class about being a doctor. He had a real stethoscope and everything. That sounds interesting, sweetheart. Do you think my daddy might come talk to our class sometime? About being in business? Emma's chest tightened. David had visited Lucas exactly 3 times in the past year. Always briefly. Always with an excuse to leave early. We'll see, baby. Or maybe you could come talk about your jobs. You have lots of different jobs. Emma looked at her son's earnest face. He didn't see shame in her work. He saw strength, capability. A mama who did whatever was necessary to take care of him. Maybe it was time she started seeing herself that way too. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Emma called her best friend, Maria. Girl, you sound different, Maria said immediately. What's going on? Emma told her everything. The gala, Janet's cruelty, Mr. Carlyle's revelation about the inheritance. Holy crap, Emma. This is huge. I know, but I'm scared. Scared of what? Of fighting people who have more power than me. Of Lucas getting caught in the middle. Of making everything worse. Maria was quiet for a moment. Then, Emma, Remember when we were kids and you found that injured bird in your backyard? The sparrow with the broken wing. Yeah. Your mama wanted to just put it out of its misery. Said it would never survive anyway. But you refused. You researched how to care for it. You fed it with an eyedropper. You made a little nest in a shoebox. Emma smiled despite her anxiety. Pip. Pip. You named that bird Pip and you fought for its life every single day for weeks. And it flew away eventually. It did, because you didn't let other people's opinions about what was possible define what you were willing to try. Emma felt tears building. This is different, Maria. No, it's not. It's the same thing. You fighting for something you love. The only difference is now it's your son's future instead of a bird's. After they hung up, Emma sat in her living room looking at Mr. Carlyle's folder. Inside were copies of legal documents, William Harper's will, trust documents, financial statements that made her head spin. But there was also a handwritten letter. To Emma Mitchell Harper. It began in shaky but elegant script. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I hope that my family has honored my wishes regarding you and your son. Your father was one of the finest men I ever had the privilege to know. In my darkest hour, when my beloved Margaret was dying, Thomas was there. Not because he owed us anything, not because it would benefit him, but because kindness was simply who he was. I saw that same kindness in you during the brief times we met. The way you spoke to the household staff with respect, the way you included everyone in conversations, the way you made my son David laugh in a way we hadn't heard in years. I don't know what the future holds for your marriage to David. But I know that you are the kind of person this world needs more of. You are the kind of mother every child deserves. And you are the kind of woman who honors her father's legacy every day. This inheritance is not charity. It is not pity. It is recognition of worth. Your worth. Your son's worth. Your father's worth. Use it well. Build the life you deserve. With profound respect and affection, William Harper. Emma cried then. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she'd kept locked for years. She cried for her father, gone too soon. She cried for the years of struggle and self-doubt. She cried for Lucas, who'd never known what it felt like to have enough. She cried for the girl she'd been, who'd believed love could conquer anything. And she cried for the woman she was becoming, who was learning that sometimes love meant fighting. The next morning, Emma called Mr. Carlyle. I want to proceed, she said simply. I'm glad to hear that. When would you like to meet to begin the paperwork? Today, if possible. But Mr. Carlyle, I want to do this right. I want to be completely transparent about everything. What do you mean? I want to tell the family myself. Before we file anything legal, they should hear about this from me, not from court documents. Carlyle was quiet for a moment. Ms. Harper, I admire your integrity, but I should warn you that could make things more difficult. They may try to dissuade you, or worse, they may attempt to contest the will. Let them try, Emma said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. My father taught me that doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing. 2 days later, Emma found herself back at the Harper mansion. But this time she wasn't invited. She'd called ahead, speaking to Richard's secretary to request a family meeting. She'd been polite but firm. This concerned Lucas, who was their family too, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. Now she sat in William Harper's former study, surrounded by David, Richard, Janet, and Richard's teenage children, Michael and Sarah. David looked uncomfortable. He'd barely made eye contact with Emma when she arrived. Richard appeared annoyed at having his day interrupted. Janet looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The teenagers seemed curious more than anything. Thank you all for agreeing to meet with me, Emma began. Of course, Richard said stiffly, though I'm not sure what requires such formality. If you need something for Lucas, surely a phone call would suffice. Emma took a breath. This is about Lucas, and about me, and about something I recently learned regarding your father's will. Janet went very still. What about the will? David asked. Emma looked directly at Janet. I know about the trust fund and the inheritance. The room erupted. Richard started asking rapid-fire questions about who had told her and what exactly she thought she knew. David looked genuinely shocked, suggesting he hadn't been informed either. The teenagers looked confused. But Janet? Janet looked caught. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly. "Who's been filling your head with these ideas? Some ambulance-chasing lawyer looking to make trouble?" "Harold Carlyle told me," Emma said calmly. The room went silent. "Uncle Harold?" Sarah asked. "But he's been our lawyer forever." "This is outrageous," Janet continued, but her voice had a desperate edge now. "Even if there were some provision, surely it was conditional. Surely there were requirements that haven't been met." Emma pulled out copies of the documents. "Would you like to review them?" Richard reached for the papers, his expression growing more serious as he read. "Jesus," he muttered. "Dad really did this." David leaned over his brother's shoulder. "How much are we talking about?" "That's not the point," Emma interrupted. "The point is that your father wanted to provide for Lucas. He wanted to ensure my son had opportunities, and instead of honoring that wish, it's been hidden from us." She looked directly at Janet again. "You knew. You've known for years." Janet's face had gone from pink to red to an alarming shade of purple. "You have some nerve," she hissed. "Waltzing in here after ignoring this family for 2 years, making demands." "I haven't made any demands. I've simply informed you that I know about provisions that already exist." "Provisions that take money from my children." And there it was, the truth Emma had suspected. "Janet," Richard said quietly, "that's enough." "No, it's not enough." Janet stood up, shaking. "We have expenses, real expenses. Michael's college tuition, Sarah's private school, the house payments, the country club dues, the image we have to maintain for your business." She whirled to face Emma. "You think you can just show up in your discount store dress and your poverty story and take what belongs to our children?" "Janet, stop," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I will not stop. This woman destroyed my brother-in-law's life. She trapped him with her pregnancy, took half his assets in the divorce, and now she wants more." Emma felt the familiar shame creeping in, the voice in her head that said maybe Janet was right. Maybe she was asking for too much. But then she heard something else, her father's voice from years ago. "Emma, baby, there's a difference between being humble and letting people walk all over you. Don't ever let anyone convince you that your worth depends on their approval." Emma stood up slowly. "You're right about one thing, Janet. I don't have expensive clothes or a big house or the right social connections. But you know what I do have?" Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I have a son who knows his mother works 3 jobs to keep food on the table and never once complains about it. I have integrity. I have the respect of people who matter, and I have something you clearly don't have." "What's that?" Janet sneered. "Class." The room went dead quiet. "Real class isn't about where you shop or what car you drive," Emma continued. "It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. It's about raising children to be kind rather than entitled." She gathered her papers. "Lucas's trust fund will be used for his education and his future. My inheritance will be used to build a stable life for both of us. Not because I'm greedy, not because I'm trying to take anything from your children, but because a good man who respected my father wanted to make sure we were okay." She looked around the room. "I won't apologize for that. And I won't pretend I don't deserve it to make you more comfortable." Emma headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Janet? The next time you want to discuss my character and circumstances in public, you might want to make sure you know who's listening." She left them sitting in stunned silence. The drive home was a blur. Emma's hands shook on the steering wheel. Had she really just said all of that? Had she really stood up to Janet Reeves in front of the entire family? Her phone rang before she even got to her driveway. "Mr. Carlyle." "Ms. Harper, I just received a call from Richard Harper. It seems there's been some discussion about expediting your inheritance process." Emma laughed, surprising herself. "I imagine there has been. How are you feeling?" "Terrified, exhilarated, like I might throw up. That sounds about right. Standing up for yourself is never easy, especially against people who are used to getting their way. That evening, Emma picked Lucas up from Maria's house where he stayed after school on her work days. How was your day, baby? Good. Maria made me help her plant flowers. Did you know some flowers come back every year all by themselves? They're called perennials. Perennials, Lucas repeated carefully. That's a big word. It means something that lasts. Something that keeps returning year after year, getting stronger each time. Lucas considered this. Like how you keep going to work even when you're tired. Emma felt her throat tighten. Something like that. Mama, are we perennials? Emma looked at her son in the rearview mirror. This beautiful, resilient little boy who'd weathered so much change and uncertainty with such grace. Yes, sweetheart, I think we are. The legal process moved quickly once it began. Richard, perhaps motivated by genuine guilt, or maybe just a desire to avoid public scandal, cooperated fully. David signed the necessary documents without argument, though he remained distant and uncomfortable throughout. Janet, however, was a different story. Emma learned from Mr. Carlyle that Janet had consulted her own attorney about contesting the will. She'd also made several attempts to pressure other family members to side with her position, but the documents were ironclad. William Harper had been very clear about his intentions. 3 weeks after the family meeting, Emma received a call that changed everything again. It wasn't from Mr. Carlyle this time. It was from Janet. "We need to talk," Janet said without preamble. "I think we've said everything that needs to be said." "Please, Emma, Janet's voice cracked. "I need to explain some things." Against her better judgment, Emma agreed to meet at a neutral location. A small cafe downtown where they were unlikely to encounter anyone from their respective social circles. Janet was already there when Emma arrived. She looked different, smaller somehow. Her perfectly styled hair showed dark roots, and her designer handbag was one Emma now recognized as a high-quality knockoff. "Thank you for coming," Janet said quietly. Emma sat across from her, waiting. "I owe you an apology." "Okay. Not just for the gala. For everything. For the way I've treated you since David brought you into the family. For the things I've said and done to make you feel unwelcome." Emma remained silent. Janet took a shaky breath. "You were right about one thing. I did know about William's will. I've known for years." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'm drowning, Emma." The admission hung between them. "Richard's business has been struggling for the past 3 years. We've been living on credit and borrowed time, trying to maintain appearances. The country club membership, the private schools, the house we can't afford. It's all been a facade." Janet's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. "When I heard about your inheritance, all I could think was that it was money my children wouldn't have. Money we needed to keep from losing everything. So you decided I didn't deserve it? I decided you didn't need it as badly as we did." Janet met Emma's eyes. "I told myself you were used to having less. That you wouldn't miss what you'd never had." Emma felt a mix of anger and pity. "What about what Lucas deserved? What my father earned through years of loyal friendship?" I know it was wrong. But desperation makes you do terrible things." They sat in silence for several minutes. "What happens now?" Emma asked finally. "I don't know. Richard doesn't know how bad things really are. The kids don't know. I've been handling the finances, hiding the bills, making minimum payments on credit cards just to keep us afloat." Janet looked up at Emma with something that might have been hope. "I know I have no right to ask. No right to expect anything from you after what I've done. But, is there any way, could we work something out? Some kind of arrangement where your inheritance could somehow help both our families?" Emma stared at her. "You want me to share my inheritance with you? I know how it sounds, but think about it. Lucas and my children are cousins. This family fighting benefits no one. If we could find a way to work together..." Emma stood up abruptly. I need to think about this. Of course, I understand. As Emma walked toward the door, Janet called after her. Emma, for what it's worth, you were right about the class thing. You have something I've never had, something I don't know how to teach my children. Emma turned back. It's not too late to learn. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She found herself thinking about families and forgiveness and the complicated ways people hurt each other out of fear. She thought about Lucas and how she wanted to raise him, with generosity of spirit, with the understanding that sometimes people lash out because they're scared, not because they're evil. She thought about her father and what he would do. The next morning, she called Mr. Carlyle. I want to set up a meeting with the entire family, she said. I have a proposal. 2 days later, they gathered again in William Harper's study. This time, the atmosphere was different, less hostile, more uncertain. Emma had spent hours preparing what she wanted to say. I've been thinking about what it means to be a family, she began, about what William Harper actually intended when he made provisions for Lucas and me. She looked around the room. I don't think he wanted to create division. I think he wanted to create security, not just for my son, but for the values he believed in: loyalty, kindness, taking care of people who matter. Richard shifted in his chair. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we find a way to honor his intentions while also addressing the real needs of this family. Emma pulled out a folder she'd prepared. Lucas's trust fund will remain intact and will be used solely for his education and future opportunities. That's non-negotiable. Everyone nodded. As for my inheritance, I propose splitting it. Half will go toward securing Lucas's and my future. The other half will go into a family emergency fund managed by Mr. Carlyle to help any family member facing genuine hardship. Janet looked like she might cry. But, Emma continued, this comes with conditions. The room tensed. First, complete financial transparency. No more secrets about debt or struggles. If someone needs help, they ask for it honestly instead of trying to manipulate or control others. She looked directly at Janet. Second, respect for all family members, regardless of their circumstances, their jobs, or their social status. Lucas and I are part of this family, and we will be treated as such. Emma's voice grew firm. Third, accountability. If anyone violates these agreements, if anyone treats another family member with cruelty or deliberate harm, they forfeit access to any family resources or support. She closed the folder. I'm offering to share something I didn't have to share, but I won't continue to expose my son to environments where he might learn that his worth depends on other people's approval. Richard looked at the documents Emma had prepared. This is extraordinarily generous. It's what my father would have done. It's what William Harper would have wanted. And it's what Lucas deserves to see from the adults in his life. The vote was unanimous. Even Janet raised her hand in agreement, tears streaming down her face. But the real change happened gradually over the months that followed. Emma enrolled in night classes to finish her college degree. With financial security for the first time in years, she could focus on building a career instead of just surviving day to day. Lucas joined the soccer team at school. Emma was there for every game, cheering from the sidelines alongside other parents who no longer saw her as an outsider, but as another mom who adored her child. Janet entered credit counseling and began seeing a therapist to address the anxiety and perfectionism that had driven so many of her destructive choices. She and Richard had difficult conversations about their lifestyle and priorities, eventually downsizing to a more modest home and finding freedom and honesty about their struggles. The family dinners Emma had dreaded became something she looked forward to, not because everything was perfect, but because they were real, authentic in a way they'd never been before. Michael and Sarah, Richard's teenagers, began spending time with Lucas. They taught him card games and helped him with homework. He taught them about resilience and finding joy in simple things. David remained somewhat distant, struggling with his own guilt about the years he'd failed to be present for his son. But he made efforts. Small ones at first, then bigger ones as Lucas welcomed him with the generous heart children possess. 6 months after that first gala, Emma found herself back at the Harper mansion for Lucas's 7th birthday party. But this time, She wasn't standing at the edges, hoping not to be noticed. She was in the kitchen with Janet and Richard's wife, Carol, laughing about something silly Lucas had said. She wore a dress she'd bought new, not because she had to prove anything, but because she wanted to celebrate her son in something that made her feel confident and happy. Mr. Carlyle had retired, as he'd hinted he might. At his farewell party, he pulled Emma aside. "You know, in all my years of practicing law, I've seen money destroy more families than it's helped. But what you did, the way you chose generosity over revenge, it restored something in that family that had been broken for years." Emma smiled. "I just did what felt right." That's exactly why it worked. As Emma watched Lucas blow out his birthday candles, surrounded by cousins who now genuinely cared about him, and adults who'd learned to see beyond their own fears and prejudices, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There were still moments of tension, times when old patterns threatened to resurface. Janet sometimes still spoke without thinking. Richard occasionally fell back into condescending behavior. David struggled to be the father Lucas deserved, but they were trying, all of them. And that effort, that commitment to growth and change, had created something beautiful from something that had been broken. Emma thought about the perennial flowers Lucas had planted with Maria, how they seemed to disappear in winter but always came back stronger, more beautiful, more resilient than before. Sometimes the hardest thing about standing up for yourself isn't the confrontation itself. It's believing you deserve to take up space in the world. It's trusting that your voice matters, that your needs are valid, that your worth doesn't depend on other people's approval or understanding. For too many years, Emma had made herself small. She'd accepted scraps and called it humility. She'd endured disrespect and called it keeping the peace. But real peace, she'd learned, comes from authentic relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. It comes from teaching children that kindness and strength aren't opposites. It comes from understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's worst behavior. The inheritance had given Emma and Lucas financial security, but the real gift had been discovering her own worth, learning to speak up for herself and her son, finding the courage to demand better and the wisdom to offer grace when people proved they could change. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right? Where someone tried to make you feel small because of your circumstances, your background, or your struggles? If this story is moving you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because your support allows us to keep sharing stories like this. It's not always easy to find that balance between fighting for yourself and extending compassion to others. Emma's journey reminds us that we can be strong and kind, that we can demand respect while still offering forgiveness, that we can protect our children while teaching them about grace. The magnolia trees that had witnessed Emma's first humiliation at the Harper Mansion now bloomed each year as markers of transformation. They reminded everyone who saw them that beauty can emerge from environments that once seemed hostile, that roots can grow deep even in challenging soil, that what appears to die in winter can return more magnificent than ever. Emma's story doesn't end at Lucas's 7th birthday party. It continues every day as she builds the life her father dreamed of for her. Every time she walks into a room with her head held high. Every time she teaches Lucas that his worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Every time she chooses courage over comfort, truth over convenience, integrity over easy answers. Because that's what real class looks like. Not the superficial markers Janet had once prized, but the deep, unshakable knowledge that every person has inherent dignity and deserves to be treated with respect. Emma learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish or difficult. It makes you strong. And when you model that strength for your children, you give them the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that they matter, that they deserve good things, that they have the power to create positive change in their own lives and the lives of others. The Harper family's story became a different kind of legacy than anyone had planned. Not just one of wealth and social position, but one of growth, redemption, and the courage to do better than previous generations. And Lucas? Lucas grew up knowing that his mother was a woman of extraordinary strength and grace, that his extended family, despite their flaws, had learned to love authentically, that money could provide security and opportunities, but that character could provide something infinitely more valuable: the ability to sleep peacefully at night, knowing you've lived according to your values. Years later, when Lucas faces his own challenges, he'll remember the lesson his mother taught him through her actions: that kindness isn't weakness, that standing up for yourself and others is a form of love, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve while still extending compassion to those who haven't learned better yet. Have you ever lived through or known someone who went through something similar? A situation where financial need met family politics, where personal dignity clashed with social expectations, where someone had to choose between being comfortable and being authentic? Emma's story reminds us that these moments of decision define not just our own lives, but the legacy we leave for our children and the example we set for our communities. Her journey from invisible single mother to confident woman who knew her worth didn't happen overnight. It required courage to face uncomfortable truths, wisdom to navigate complex family dynamics, and the strength to stand firm in her values even when it would have been easier to back down. But perhaps most importantly, it required the recognition that true victory doesn't come from defeating others or proving you're better than them. It comes from creating space for everyone to be their best selves, from offering both accountability and grace, from understanding that we all have the capacity to grow and change if we're given the right circumstances and support. The magnolias still bloom every spring outside the Harper Mansion, but now they bloom for a family that has learned the difference between reputation and character, between appearance and authenticity, between keeping up facades and building genuine relationships. They bloom for Emma and Lucas, who found their place not by diminishing themselves, but by standing tall in their truth. They bloom for Janet, who discovered that vulnerability could lead to healing rather than weakness. They bloom for all of us who have ever felt invisible, undervalued, or dismissed because of our circumstances, and who need to be reminded that our worth isn't determined by other people's limitations or fears. If this story resonated with you, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Share it with someone who might need to hear Emma's message: that standing up for yourself is not selfish, that demanding respect is not unreasonable, and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their bank account, their job title, or their address. Because in the end, that's what real class looks like. And it's something every single one of us can choose to embody, starting right now. 2 years later, Emma stood in the same spot where she had once felt so small and insignificant. But this time, she wasn't there as a reluctant guest at someone else's event. She was there as the newly appointed director of the Harper Family Foundation's educational initiative. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had once been dismissed as having no breeding, no class, was now responsible for overseeing scholarships and educational programs for underprivileged children throughout Savannah. It had been Richard's idea, actually. During one of their now regular family meetings, he'd proposed expanding the foundation's work beyond the traditional charity galas and society events. "We need someone who understands what it's like to struggle," he'd said, looking directly at Emma. "Someone who knows what these kids are going through. Someone who won't just throw money at problems but will understand the real barriers they face." Janet had been the first to second the motion. The transformation in Janet had been remarkable. The credit counseling and therapy had helped, but Emma suspected the real change had come from something simpler: the relief of not having to pretend anymore, of not having to maintain a perfect facade while drowning in debt and anxiety. Janet's children, Michael and Sarah, had thrived in their new environment. Michael was excelling at the state university on an academic scholarship he'd earned on his own merit, no longer burdened by the pressure to attend an expensive private college his family couldn't afford. Sarah had discovered a talent for community service, often volunteering alongside Emma at local after-school programs. As Emma walked through the foundation's new community center, she marveled at how much had changed. The building, a renovated warehouse in one of Savannah's most neglected neighborhoods, buzzed with activity. Children worked on homework at donated computers. Teenagers participated in job readiness programs. Parents attended financial literacy classes and GED preparation courses. Lucas, now 9, often spent his afternoons here after school, not because Emma couldn't afford childcare anymore, but because he loved helping the younger children with their reading. Emma watched him patiently sound out words with a 6-year-old named Marcus, whose circumstances reminded her painfully of her own childhood struggles. "Miss Emma?" Marcus looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Lucas says his mama used to clean offices at night. Is that true?" Emma knelt down beside the children. "Yes, sweetheart, I did. I cleaned offices and waited tables and did lots of different jobs to take care of Lucas." "Why?" "Because that's what parents do. We do whatever we need to do to take care of our children." Marcus nodded solemnly. "My mama works 3 jobs too. She sounds like a very strong woman." "She is. Just like Lucas says you are." Emma felt the familiar tightness in her throat. These moments still caught her off guard. The way children saw strength where she had once seen only struggle. The way Lucas talked about their journey not with shame, but with pride. Later that evening, as Emma was locking up the center, she found David waiting by her car. These visits had become more frequent over the past year, not the grudging, duty-bound appearances of before, but genuine attempts to connect with his son and, surprisingly, with Emma. "How are things going?" he asked, gesturing toward the building. "Better than I expected. We're actually having to turn some families away because we don't have enough space." David nodded. "Richard mentioned that. He's been talking about expanding funding." They walked to Emma's car in comfortable silence. This was new too, this lack of tension between them. The divorce had been bitter and painful, but time and their shared love for Lucas had helped them find a different kind of relationship. Not romantic, not even particularly close, but respectful and cooperative. "Emma, I owe you an apology," David said suddenly. She turned to look at him, surprised. "For what?" "For not standing up to Janet sooner. For not fighting harder for you and Lucas when we were married. For letting you carry the burden of our family's dysfunction when I should have been protecting you from it." Emma studied his face in the parking lot's dim lighting. "We were both young, David. We both made mistakes. You didn't make the mistake of choosing your family's approval over your wife and child." "No," Emma agreed quietly. "But I made the mistake of thinking love would be enough to overcome all our differences. Of not speaking up when I should have. Of making myself smaller and smaller trying to fit into a world that didn't want me." David was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think we could have made it work? If things had been different?" Emma considered the question she'd asked herself countless times over the years. "I think we were 2 people who cared about each other but wanted fundamentally different things. You wanted to maintain your place in a world I never felt comfortable in. I wanted to build something new, something more authentic. And now? Now I think we're both exactly where we need to be." As Emma drove home that night, she reflected on how much truth there was in that statement. She was exactly where she needed to be. Not just professionally, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. The woman who had once stood at the edge of the Harper driveway, afraid to take up space, now ran programs that affected hundreds of lives. The mother who had worried about her son's future now watched him grow into a confident, compassionate young man who understood both privilege and struggle. The daughter of Thomas Mitchell now carried forward her father's legacy of kindness and service, but on a scale he never could have imagined. When Emma arrived home, she found Lucas at the kitchen table, working on a school project about family history. "Mama, can you tell me more about Grandpa Thomas?" he asked, looking up from his poster board. Emma sat beside him, looking at the photos he'd arranged. Thomas in his work clothes, smiling proudly at a job site. Thomas with Emma at her high school graduation. Thomas holding baby Lucas just weeks before his heart attack. "What do you want to know?" "Mrs. Peterson says I should write about what makes our family special, but I don't know what to write." Emma smiled. "What do you think makes our family special?" Lucas considered this seriously. Well, you're really strong, and you help lots of people. And even though we didn't always have much money, you always made sure I had what I needed. Is that what makes our family special? I think so, and also we don't give up, even when things are hard. Emma felt that familiar swell of pride and love. Those are very good observations. What else? We forgive people. Like how you forgave Aunt Janet even after she was mean to you, and how you and Dad are friends now even though you got divorced. Those are important things to remember. Lucas picked up his pencil and began writing. I think I'll write about how Grandpa Thomas taught you to be kind and strong, and how you're teaching me the same thing. As Emma watched her son work, she thought about the cycles we create in families, how pain can be passed down through generations, but so can strength. How choosing forgiveness doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, but rather refusing to let other people's wounds become your own. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, Emma found herself standing on her small back porch, looking up at the stars. It was a ritual she'd developed over the years, these moments of quiet reflection before bed. She thought about the woman she'd been at that first gala, how desperately she'd wanted to be accepted, to be seen as worthy of belonging to the Harper family, how she'd internalized their judgments and made them her own. She thought about her father and how he would have reacted to Janet's cruelty. Not with matching cruelty, she knew, but with the kind of quiet dignity that made people examine their own behavior. She thought about William Harper's letter, which she still kept in her jewelry box. His words about kindness and character had become a touchstone for her, a reminder that worth isn't something others bestow upon you, but something you carry within yourself. 3 months later, Emma received an invitation that would test everything she'd learned about forgiveness and grace. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had participated in Janet's gossip session at that first gala, was hosting a fundraiser for her own charity. The invitation was formal and elegant, exactly the kind of event Emma had once dreaded. But Mrs. Patterson had added a handwritten note. Dear Emma, I know this may seem presumptuous given our history, but I've been following your work with the Harper Foundation. I would be honored if you would consider speaking at our event about your experiences with educational inequality. I believe your voice is exactly what our community needs to hear. Margaret Patterson. Emma stared at the invitation for a long time. Part of her wanted to decline. Mrs. Patterson had been cruel that night, joining in Janet's character assassination without hesitation. But another part of her recognized an opportunity, not for revenge, but for education, for the kind of bridge building her father would have attempted. She called Mrs. Patterson directly. Mrs. Patterson, this is Emma Harper. I received your invitation. Oh, Emma, I'm so glad you called. I wasn't sure you would. I'll be honest, I'm surprised you invited me. There was a pause. I owe you an explanation, and probably an apology. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. That night at the Harper Mansion, the way I participated in Janet's commentary about you and your circumstances, it was cruel and unnecessary. Emma waited. I've watched what you've accomplished over the past 2 years, the programs you've developed, the families you've helped. I've realized that my judgments that night said far more about my character than they did about yours. What changed your mind? My granddaughter, Mrs. Patterson said simply. She graduated from high school last year, but she wasn't ready for college. She needed time to mature, to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. She got a job at a coffee shop to save money and gain some independence. Emma could guess where this story was going. Last month, I overheard some women at the country club discussing her situation. They used some of the same language about her that I had used about you, called her aimless, and suggested she lacked direction and proper motivation. I felt sick listening to them tear apart a young woman they barely knew. Mrs. Patterson's voice grew thick with emotion. That's when I realized what we had done to you, how we had dismissed your struggles and your strength with such casual cruelty, how we had judged your worth based on your circumstances rather than your character. Emma felt a complex mix of emotions, validation for the pain she'd experienced, but also compassion for a grandmother who had learned a difficult lesson. "I appreciate your honesty, Mrs. Patterson. Will you consider speaking at our event? Not because I think you owe our community anything, but because I think we have a lot to learn from you." Emma thought about Lucas, about the lessons she wanted to teach him about grace and growth. "I'll do it," she said, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "I want to bring some of our program participants with me. Not as examples or testimonials, but as equal voices in the conversation. If we're going to talk about educational inequality, the people experiencing it should be part of the discussion." "Of course. That's exactly what we need." The night of Mrs. Patterson's fundraiser, Emma stood in front of an audience of Savannah's social elite. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her sat 3 teenagers from the community center's programs, 2 single mothers from the adult education classes, and Marcus's mother, who had recently completed her GED. Emma looked out at the crowd, recognizing many faces from that night 2 years ago. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared genuinely interested. "2 years ago, I stood in a room very much like this one," Emma began. "But I wasn't standing at a podium. I was standing at the edge of the room, hoping not to be noticed, while people I barely knew discussed my character and circumstances as entertainment." A murmur went through the audience. That night, I learned something important about the difference between charity and justice. Charity is what happens when people with resources decide to help people without them. Justice is what happens when we recognize that everyone deserves dignity, respect, and opportunity, regardless of their current circumstances. Emma gestured to the panel beside her. "Tonight, I'm not here to tell you stories about the deserving poor or to make you feel good about your contributions to worthy causes. I'm here with these remarkable individuals to talk about partnership, about listening, about the difference between helping and empowering." For the next hour, the panel shared their experiences with education, employment, and the barriers they'd encountered. Marcus's mother, Rosa, spoke eloquently about juggling 3 jobs while pursuing her GED. 17-year-old Jasmine discussed the challenges of being the first in her family to consider college. Single mother Carol talked about the stigma of attending community college in her 30s. But they also spoke about their dreams, their achievements, their contributions to their communities. The audience listened with an attention Emma had never seen at these types of events. These weren't distant statistics or sob stories. These were neighbors, fellow community members, people with names and faces and complex lives. During the question and answer period, a woman Emma didn't recognize raised her hand. "This has been very educational," she said. "But I have to ask, what's the difference between what you're describing and what we've always done? We've always supported scholarships and food drives and clothing donations." Rosa leaned forward to answer. "Ma'am, when my son Marcus needed school supplies, the charity gave him a backpack and some notebooks. That was helpful, and I was grateful. But when Miss Emma's program started, Marcus didn't just get supplies. He got a tutor who helped him with reading. He got confidence. He got the belief that he could succeed." She paused, looking directly at the woman who had asked the question. The charity treated the symptoms. The program treated the cause. After the event, Emma found herself surrounded by people wanting to learn more about the Foundation's work, wanting to volunteer, wanting to partner, rather than simply donate. Mrs. Patterson approached as the crowd was thinning. "Thank you," she said simply. "I learned more tonight than I have in years of these events. Thank you for being open to learning. Emma, can I ask you something personal?" Emma nodded. "How did you do it? How did you forgive us? How did you turn something so painful into something so positive?" Emma thought about the question. "I had good teachers. My father taught me that holding on to anger only hurts yourself. My son taught me that children learn more from what we do than what we say. And honestly, Janet taught me something important too." "What's that?" "She taught me that people who act from fear and desperation often do terrible things. But that doesn't make them terrible people. It makes them people who need understanding and support to do better." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "I hope I can learn to see the world the way you do." "You can. You already started by inviting me here tonight." As Emma drove home from the fundraiser, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a woman afraid to take up space to someone who could command a room. From someone who accepted disrespect to maintain peace to someone who demanded dignity while extending grace. But perhaps most importantly, from someone who saw herself as separate from the community that had rejected her, to someone who understood that communities are only as strong as their commitment to lift up all their members. Lucas was asleep when she got home, but he'd left her a note on the kitchen counter. "Mom, I'm proud of you for helping people learn to see better. Love, Lucas." Emma smiled, carefully folding the note and adding it to the collection she kept in her desk drawer. All the ways her son had learned to see strength instead of struggle, service instead of sacrifice. She thought about William Harper's letter, about her father's legacy, about the magnolia trees that bloomed each spring regardless of the previous winter's harshness. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations and decisive victories, but Emma's story was different. It was about the slow, steady work of building a better world. About the courage to keep showing up, keep speaking truth, keep extending both accountability and grace. It was about understanding that real class isn't something you're born with or something you can buy. It's something you choose every day in how you treat others and how you move through the world. As Emma prepared for bed that night, she looked in the bathroom mirror and saw something that had taken her years to recognize: a woman of worth. Not because of her bank account or her job title or her address, but because of her choices. Her daily decisions to be kind but not weak, generous but not naive, forgiving but not foolish. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more families to serve, more barriers to overcome, more people to teach about the difference between charity and justice. But tonight, Emma Harper, daughter of Thomas Mitchell, mother of Lucas Harper, director of the Harper Family Foundation, went to sleep knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Not because someone else had given her permission to be there, but because she had claimed her place with courage, dignity, and grace. And outside her window, the magnolia trees rustled in the gentle evening breeze, their buds preparing for another season of impossible beauty, another year of proving that the most magnificent growth often comes from the deepest roots and the strongest resistance. The story continues every day, in every choice to see people as they truly are, rather than through the lens of prejudice and assumption. In every decision to offer partnership instead of charity, understanding instead of judgment. It continues in Lucas, who grows up understanding that strength and kindness aren't opposites, that standing up for yourself and others is a form of love, that every person deserves dignity regardless of their circumstances. It continues in Janet, who learned that vulnerability could lead to healing, that honesty could lead to freedom, that worth isn't measured by appearances but by actions. It continues in David, who discovered that being a good father meant more than providing financial support, that respect was earned through presence and authenticity rather than position and status. It continues in all the families served by the foundation, who learn that their dreams and aspirations are valid, that their children deserve the same opportunities as children born into privilege, that education and support can break cycles of poverty and limitation. And it continues in each of us, every time we choose to see beyond our assumptions, every time we offer dignity instead of charity, every time we remember that true class is measured not by what we have, but by how we treat those who have less. Because in the end, that's what Emma's story teaches us, that the most powerful transformations happen not through dramatic gestures, but through daily choices to be better than we were yesterday. Through the courage to stand up for what's right, the wisdom to extend grace when others are ready to change, and the strength to keep blooming, season after season, no matter how harsh the previous winter might have been. This is the legacy of Thomas Mitchell's daughter. This is the lesson of the magnolia trees. This is the promise that spring's eternal in the human heart, that growth is always possible, that dignity is always available, and that real class is always within our reach if we're brave enough to claim it.